livestock, what would be your recommendations? And that goes into, there's a great deal of detail. You know, you could write the whole hour on that. You could write about how much to convert and what to convert it to, and how to convert it, right? How to maintain and manage it as it gets established. Is he going to graze it, or are you going to recommend any for hay? So there's a lot that can go into that. So the focus, not everything, but the focus will be those three big lectures on farmland, forest land, and wetland habitats. Okay, so be sure that you really work on those and get a good understanding of those. Okay, there will be some short answer questions too, but certainly, but be ready. There could be. I'm not sure. I haven't written it yet. I'm not sure, but there could be some long problems. Okay. Any questions at this point on that? Okay. Just be ready in class for an exam review. I might say, okay, what are some questions that you think might be on there, and we can review that information like I've done in other classes. Okay. Cool. Okay. Who has been involved in prescribed fire? Anybody? Oh, excellent. Good. Okay. All right. Let's talk about prescribed fire controlled burning. There's a map I meant to include here, and I didn't, but I can explain it. Why in wildlife habitat management might we conduct controlled burns?
Promote growth of plants.
To promote growth of plants, and how does controlled burning promote growth of plants?
Some pines need it to reproduce, and it opens up the forest floor so that the seeds that are trapped underneath everything can sprout.
Good. Okay. All right. So some plants, their seeds require heat scarification, right? Some pines, for example, and leaf litter can inhibit seed germination, and when we do burn, that puts those nutrients into the soil, heats that soil up, and just prepares it as a seed bed. Good. So that kind of implies that this is fire is a natural process, right? This is a fire is a disturbance. Have I talked about the term disturbance in this class? What is a disturbance?
Interference of biomass.
What?
Interference of biomass.
Interference of biomass? You sound like that's a definition you got from another class.
No, I got it from doing research.
Okay. I define disturbance ecologically as anything that removes vegetation from the landscape. Okay. So what are some examples of natural disturbances? Of course, wildfire. What else?
Volcanoes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Landslide. Good. And you think that doesn't happen very often. In the mountains, it can happen quite often, including East Tennessee and Oregon. We had landslide. I worked a summer in Alaska at Misty Fjords National Monument, and on 3 separate occasions working in these steep rainforest mountains, we heard rumbling. Almost felt it, and looked around, and finally we'd see 3 miles away, 4,000 feet above us, a section of mountain, maybe quarter acre, just moving down. 80, 100, 120 foot trees, just all moving down. Then they'd settle. So yeah, landslides for sure. It could be disturbed. Sometimes a tree or two would fall, but okay. Other examples around here of disturbance.
Tornadoes?
Sure, absolutely. Come on, guys.
Rain?
Trees falling.
Rain, specifically.
Like flooding.
Floods, absolutely floods. Good. What?
Is it big trees falling?
What causes big trees to fall? Wind, good. What else?
Beavers?
Okay. From chewing them down to the flooding that they cause, it kills them, okay? Ice storms, disease, insect infestations, right? Grazing. Those are all natural disturbances. So what are some anthropogenic or artificial disturbances? Prescribed fire, what else?
Strip mining.
Strip mining, good. Clear cutting, good.
Fragmentation, like habitat fragmentation.
Due to,
Human roads or suburbs.
yeah, so urbanization, good. And what's the other big cause of fragmentation around here? Yeah, agriculture in forms of, okay, and then what two big ways to agriculture? Three.
Row crop.
So, okay, what is disturbance?
The removal of vegetation.
That's right. So how does row cropping remove vegetation? What do they have to do to remove vegetation?
Herbicide.
Herbicide is one, that's right.
Till of just the fields.
Tillage, so plowing or disking, good, okay. And if you're not talking about row crop agriculture, what's the other? If you're not farming plants, you're farming, and that, it means grazing, yeah. Good. So those are all examples of disturbance. So when we go back to fire, natural fire is a disturbance. Fires happen in most ecosystems, not all, but most of them. The question is, how frequently do they happen? And when we look at fire scar records of the soil, of trees, and different ways we can look at how frequently, on average, do different ecosystems have natural fires come through. Some ecosystems, like the Deep South, the coastal pine of the South Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, those pine systems had fires on average every 1 or 2 years. Around here, it was maybe every 4 years. In some places, it might be every 20 years. In the rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, every 20 to 40 years, right? So those are called fire return intervals, right? And one of the things we're recognizing in habitat management is that if we're wanting to manage for all species, to maintain the integrity of a habitat, the best thing we can do is try to restore and maintain that historical fire return interval. So, Smokey the Bear taught us that fire was bad. We were putting them all out for a century before we realized that we're doing more harm than good. Now trying to get these ecosystems back into those early historical fire return intervals is proving challenging, partly because prescribed burning is expensive, and it's more expensive and harder to control those fires when we've allowed the fuels to build up a lot, right? So we're trying to do that. I'm getting into kind of a sub-discipline of habitat management called restoration ecology. It's about restoring native ecosystems and habitats for all of our wildlife, which is a really cool area of study. If I hadn't done what I'm doing, I think being a restoration ecologist would be something I would really enjoy doing. But okay, let's talk about prescribed fire. So what does it do? Like Skylar said, it removes debris from the ground. Some of the nutrients go into the atmosphere. Some of the nutrients go back into the soil. For some species, the heat scarification of the seeds, like Srotmus pines, like Skylar mentioned. Burning reduces the fuel load, so that reduces the danger of wildfires coming through. I think most of you understand this, but just to be sure everybody's on the same page. When Smokey the Bear said fires are bad and we suppressed fires, the Forest Service for decades had something called the 10 o'clock policy. Any fire that we find, we're going to try to put out by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning or have it under control by 10. And that's done so much damage. We got rid of that a long time ago, but when we put fires out, those fuels don't burn up. Those fuels out on average are burning up in the Deep South every year or two. Around here, every 4 years. The leaf litter gets burnt down. All the branches and sticks on the floor get consumed. So when we put it out, that keeps on building up. So when a fire does come, a lightning strike before the rain, then the fire has a whole lot of fuel and it burns bigger and hotter. A lot of the time, fires that burn historically would be what we call kind of relatively cool and spotty, right? There was a fire not too long ago, so there's a little bit more fuel here, a little bit less there, so the fire will kind of flare up over here, and it meanders over there and kind of peters out, and then it kind of is halfway burning. Oh, there's a little bit more over here and not much over there. And when you go back and look at it the next day or next week or next month after the fire, there's spots that burn, some spots that burned really hot and it burned everything and killed some trees, some spots where it just missed it all together. There wasn't much fuel there. And that creates very heterogeneous conditions, which is great. It creates more patchy, horizontally heterogeneous, some areas that are more open spaces, some areas that have dead trees, some areas that have more dead wood and leaf litter. And that's good for all around biodiversity. And it reduces that fuel load. It can maintain early successional conditions, but not always. But if you've got prairies, it helps keep them in prairies. You can use fire to remove woody encroachment, as we've talked about, if you're trying to maintain a prairie, to kill back the trees, like those sweet gums, to keep it big. So when do we burn? If we're talking about native warm season grasses, about 3 years is usually pretty good, okay? You go 4, you start getting more woody encroachment. You go 2, you could start killing stuff that doesn't like fire quite that frequently. But it kind of differs. You could shoot for every 3 years, and maybe 1 year your window to burn this one particular area, it rains the whole time, and you don't get to burn it this year. Oh, well, I guess I'm going to burn it next year. I've got a lot of funding and a lot of manpower this year. I've got time to burn it now. It's only been 2 years, but I'm not sure if I'll have the time and money next year, so I'm going to do it now. So every 2 to 3 years is pretty common. If we burn native warm season grasses early in the spring, like February or early March, that's before a lot of forbs have started growing. Some cool season forbs are growing, but a lot of them haven't started growing yet. So that prepares the ground, and most of the forbs really take off. So a late February burn is great for increasing forbs, okay? If we wait until, say, late March or early April, to me, it's harder to burn then, but what you're gonna do is kill back a bunch of your forbs that have germinated, right? And that's gonna release the grasses that start growing a little bit later. So each spring, forbs usually start coming up a lot before grasses. There's some early season, cool season grasses, but in native warm season grass, that's not what we're managing for. So early spring is good for forbs, later spring is good for grass. You got that? Usually about half the class misses that if I ask it on an exam. Okay. Late growing season, it's like I say September, October, but maybe even August, September. If it's October, early October, reduces woody encroachment. There's more smoke, vegetation comes back in the spring. I don't usually love growing season burns, especially late growing season burns, because you lose that vegetation over the course of the winter. They don't have winter cover. But if you've got woody encroachment, then it's a really good and useful tool. If I ask you when to burn to reduce woody encroachment, for whatever reason, a lot of the time people in this class say fall. I don't like that answer, okay? Because yeah, October is fall, but fall suggests the trees are in dormancy to me. And if you do this after trees have gone into dormancy, you have eliminated the possibility of getting the one benefit you're getting, which is killing trees before they go into dormancy. So say late growing season, okay? Or September works for me, right? Good? So what are great conditions for a burn? Clear is nice. It's not mandatory, but it's nice. Mid-morning to mid-afternoon is good. Early morning, a lot of the time it's too humid. Late morning, a lot of the time it might be too dry, or late afternoon, too dry or windy. So middle of the day is good. Great temperature is 40 to 70 degrees. I've burnt in snow. I've burnt in the 80s, but the hotter it gets, the more volatile it can be. A little bit of wind is actually a good thing. It can help carry the fire. Too much wind is a bad thing. It makes the fire harder to control. So 3 to 10 mile an hour wind is nice. I like about 5 or 6 mile an hour wind. One of the challenges of a very light wind is that if it's a really light wind, that wind often around here it'll come and go, and often it'll come and go from different directions. If there's a pretty heavy consistent wind, it's usually coming from one direction. If there's a real light breeze blowing, it'll be coming from the north, and then a minute later it'll be coming from the west, and a minute later it'll be coming from the south, and that makes it really hard to control the direction of the fire. So a little bit heavier wind, 5, 6 miles per hour, even 7 miles per hour, makes it a little bit more consistent. Does that make sense? But you got to schedule a burn day, and it falls within your parameters. You take what you can get. Okay, you work with it. These relative humidity to me is one of the most critical things. If it's too high, it's just difficult to get the fire to carry. If it's too low, the fire becomes very volatile and it's harder to control. And generally, relative humidity is high in the morning and drops throughout the day. There is a device called a Kestrel. I'll show you a picture of it later. I'll pull it out sometime. It's really handy. You can look at the temperature, the wind speed, and the relative humidity all with it. You just have it around your neck. And when I've burned in this lab before, many a day, the relative humidity would start out around 35, and by the end of the lab, it had dropped down below 25, and you could tell the fire was getting volatile. It would very easily move over a fire break. We're having to be really, really careful. Less important to me is fuel moisture, but if the fuel is too moist, it won't burn. But it's amazing how fast fuel will dry out. I've burned very successfully many days when it rained, not just a hard downpour for hours and hours, but when there was a shower during the night, by 2 o'clock the next afternoon, it was dry and fine to burn. Grass can dry out pretty quickly. Soil moisture, that's not a deciding characteristic, but if it's damp, it's a lot easier to keep that fire from moving through the ground through a fire break. And it also creates more spotty conditions where you got one area that's burned more thoroughly and another area where it hasn't. I like to see a native warm season grass field that's been burned that has patches where the duff, I like it when most of the litter layer is gone, so there's bare ground, because that's what quail need, right? But if there's little patches where there's still litter, dead grass, where there's still duff, that's refugia for invertebrates, right? And those little patches become, food sources for the chicks of young birds and stuff. So when we burn, you can go to any government site, but one site that has a lot of information is weather.gov/fire. You can say, you can specify a site. I did this for my house, 3 miles southeast of Martin, Tennessee, humidity, wind speed, barometric pressure, dew point, visibility. So it gives you all that you need and more, some other things that I'll talk about later. So that's a very helpful fire predictive tool. Day before the fire, what's it looking like? What are they predicting? Day of the fire, when we're about to light the fire, you can pull it up and say, we're looking good. Okay, so how do you do it? First, a lot of preparation for a fire. First, get your permissions, and that involves permits. If we're going to burn at my house, who do you imagine I might need permission from?
Your wife.
My wife. Yes, indeed, my wife. Thank you.
City?
Nope, I don't live in the city limits. If we're going to burn here on the college farm, I would need the permission of the city. But I live outside of the city limits.
So it would be county?
That's right, the county, yeah. And actually, for that, the person the group that's responsible for that is the Tennessee Division of Forestry. So it's the state government that has a fire office in every county. So I'd call and go to the telephone book, blue pages. I guess nobody uses that anymore, but just Google up Weakley County, Tennessee Division of Forestry. and we'll come up with a number. And you call and say, I need a permit to do a burn. And I love the state government. Usually there's a little old lady, I forget her name, but she says, what you gonna burn, hun? And I say, I'm gonna burn about 3 acres of grass, of broom sedge in the back field. What time y'all gonna burn it, hun? Or more this afternoon, about 2 o'clock or so. Said, y'all know what you're doing? I said, yes, ma'am. We've got so many students, and these are the tools, and we do this about every year. All right, y'all, permit number 92. Y'all be careful now. That's the permit. That's the process. Pretty simple. Federal government, it's a lot more complicated and circuitous process. For Tennessee, for in the city, I would call the fire chief, the Martin Fire Department. And it's the same thing. I see, your permission to burn. I'm going to burn tomorrow. They're like, okay, check back with us tomorrow. Let's be sure that the conditions are good. And I call them up, and they know what I'm going to do, and they say, yep, you're good to go. If I'm going to burn on the farm, who would I call besides the city fire department? Let me ask a different question. If I set a native warm season grass field on fire on the farm, and it's a really nice fire, who might start receiving phone calls? Your field's on fire! Who might people call?
Any surrounding landowner.
What's that?
Any surrounding landowner.
Surrounding landowners. That's right. That's one person I should call. Is neighboring landowners. Who else is going to get calls?
The school.
Who at the school?
Whoever is over the.
Grandma LaRue doesn't know who's in charge. She's going to call whoever she knows at the school. Who are some people at the school who might get calls?
Dean?
The farm manager, the chancellor, the dean, the department chair, and one more. Department of Public Safety. Think about it. The farm manager, his boss, the chair of the ag department, his boss, the dean of the College of Agriculture, his boss, the chancellor of the university, and the people responsible for public safety, right? Because we don't have a campus fire department, right? I email all 5 of those people and say I'm going to burn these. Thanks for telling me, because they're going to get calls. Okay. Yes, ma'am. It's all good. It's all good. So get your permissions. Always get your permissions. Okay. The next thing is wherever we're going to burn, we have to have some sort of control around that area. We call that a fire line. And I'm going to spend some time talking about fire lines. So have those fire lines ready, and then have a fire plan. That's a burn plan, and I'll talk about that. You don't just go out and say, well, I guess let's go and throw a match. And no, you have a plan in place. We're going to talk about how you create that plan. Have your crews, have their gear, know what crews and gear you're going to need. We'll talk about that. And realize, guys, that one big product of fires is smoke. And I might catch a field on fire and not send flame anywhere near Hinesville Road, but I could send a bunch of dense smoke across Hinesville Road. And if I send so much that it causes a car accident, that's on me. I'm responsible for my smoke.
Do you control where it goes?
Good question. We'll get there. So, fire can kill you. So we dress in things that won't do things like melt to our skin. So we don't wear nylon or polyester, right? We wear natural fibers. Leather is good, cotton is good, and what most people wear, you see on all the TV and stuff, is people wearing the yellow coats and the yellow pants, right? That's made out of a material usually called Nomex. There's other brands, but we call all that stuff collectively PPE, personal protective equipment. If you're going to be burning a lot, for a state agency, they'll pay for your Nomex equipment and your helmet. We do things like don't let your hair down. If you got long hair, put it back wear long sleeves, gloves usually. Fire can, you can get cinders in your eyes and smoke in your eyes, so if your eyes are sensitive and you wear contacts and glasses are generally better, right? So those are all considerations. So what kind of gear do we use? We use a little bit of gear for starting fires and a lot of gear for controlling fires, for putting it out. The most common thing we use for starting fires is called a drip torch, okay? Now this is a cylinder that usually holds a couple gallons, a gallon or two, a couple gallons, that might not be much more than a gallon, probably a gallon and a half, of fuel that's usually a combination of diesel fuel and gasoline, okay? The gasoline combusts, the diesel carries, and that combination works pretty well. What should the percentage be? It depends. Different people say different things. Most of the books that are all about safety suggest that you have a much higher ratio of diesel to gas. They'll say, oh, it should be 75% diesel, 25% gas. But most of the people I know who are doing this out of the field are like, no, that's no good. You need a lot more gas. So a very general rule of thumb is you just don't ever have more gas than diesel. Okay. So, if it's cooler, you can go up to about 50-50, and I usually go around 45-55, 45% gas to 55% diesel, but different people like different things, okay? The closer you get to 50-50, the more volatile, the more close to combustible it gets, so you have to be careful. So what the drip torch has is out here at the end is a wick, okay? And there's a little screw right here that's your airlock, that lets air in, so that when you turn it down, gas comes out this tube, and that little loop there, I'll explain in a second, comes out this tube, comes out that little thing, gas passes through the wick, which is on fire, and then flows out. So the more you open the airlock, the faster gas comes out. So it comes out, the fuel comes out. It can come out drip, 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 call it a drip torch, or it can come out as a stream. You need it just kind of a small stream or a quick drip, right? So that when you turn it down and you walk along, it's drip, 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 and it's just drip and flame, drip, 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 drip. And when you turn it up, so the fuel goes back down the tube again, what that loop keeps from happening is keeps fire from getting down in the tank and blowing up, right?
That's nice to know.
Yeah, right, it's always nice, yeah. So, if you've done your job, and you're not gonna be using it for a while, you turn it back up and you can just blow out the wick like a big candle and just set it down out of the way somewhere, okay? Okay. Water is great. All these other tools don't control fire as effectively as water, but the disadvantage of water in the backcountry, stuff's heavy. It's really, really heavy, right? So, I'll usually have one or two big guys, with a 5 gallon tank of water on their back, and they're just schlepping along with that big heavy thing. If you're in the backcountry doing a big fire, you're going to run out eventually, and if you don't have a place to refill, then it's not helpful. So what we use a lot of the time is something that the name is a little bit ironic. They're called flaps because it looks like a big mud flap on a stick. Okay, has anybody seen them at the Critter Shack? And the reason that the name is ironic is because the name suggests that what you do is flap it to put out the fire, but that's exactly what you don't do. Because if you do that, what are you doing? You're fanning it, right? And spreading flame everywhere. So what you actually do is just much more mundane. You just set it down on the flame and you just kind of move it along and just smother it like a little piece of carpet. It's often little flames and you can put it out with your foot. Just real easy. In forested situations, we often use fire rakes as well. That can be to pull fuel back away from the fire lane or take something that's at the edge of the fire lane and push it back into the fire. And this was developed by a firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service back in maybe the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. It's called a Pulaski. Has anybody ever heard of a Pulaski? It was the guy's name. His name was Pulaski. It's an axe on the front, and he just welded a hoe on the back. So you can use it for, if you're making a fire lane through the woods, you can use the hoe for moving logs or pulling up tree roots, or you can turn it around and use the axe for chopping out tree roots or chopping out logs, okay? So it's just a versatile tool. This a hygrometer is any device that's used to measure relative humidity. We used to use something called a sling hygrometer. You twirled it around on the string, but now we use the Kestrel, and it's just it's about this big. It can go on a thing around your neck. It's electronic, and it can tell you wind speed, temperature, relative humidity. Super handy little device. So I have one in here, and everybody I know who uses fire uses the Kestrel. It's super handy. Okay, so any questions about any of that? We're good? All right, so what's involved? There's different firing techniques, okay? We usually start with something called a backfire, and that is a fire that burns against the wind. So imagine this situation, guys. Imagine this room here is a field, okay? An acre, 100 acres, whatever, okay? And let's say, okay, that way's north, right? Behind you is north, you're looking south. And let's say that the wind is coming from the north, okay? It's blowing from you towards me, okay? If we have fire lanes all the way around the field, okay? And if we start by laying down a line of fire along that north end, the wind is going to carry it this way, okay? That's called a head fire, all right? And a fire that's being carried with the wind tends to be a bigger, more volatile, faster fire, okay? And that's fine and well until we get down to this end. And if I've got a little fire line right here and a great, big, fast-moving, heavy fire coming at it, it could very easily jump right over the fire line and keep going. So what I want to do first is lay fire right here along the back of the field, the downwind side of the field. Oops. And it's going to burn. This is a backfire burning slowly against the wind, right? And when I lay down a line of fire, it's going to go in two directions. It's going to go that way and this way. But I've got a fire line here, so it goes this way, and there's no fuel, and it goes that way, right? So it's going against the wind. It's going very slowly, right? Now, if there's no wind, it's creeping along a little faster. If there's a heavy wind, it's going real slow, but it depends on how much fuel there is, right? You might remember me saying during lab the other day, fuel like grass burns a lot more easily than fuel like forbs, which tend to be a little bit more sticky, a little bit closer to woody, right? So I don't like 100% forbs in my prairies because it's just hard to carry a fire. I like enough grass to carry that fire, okay? So you get a backfire started, and once it burns, and it takes a while going against the wind, it's going really slow. Once it burns a ways, what you've done is you turn this little fire line back here a couple feet wide, 2 or 3 feet wide, you create, this is called a black line that you burned, and it gets 10, 15, 20 feet. Now you've got a big, wide fire line here, right? So when I create a head fire then, it's going to come down and get to this fire line, and it doesn't have to cross 2 or 3 feet. It would have to cross 10 or 20 or whatever feet. It's much less likely to do it. So we usually start with a backfire. Then what we're often do is, because we've got the sides as well, you know, and a fire could jump sideways as well. So we might then light the sides, and that's called a flanking fires, okay? And then we light the head fire that comes. And what often happens, guys, is you might spend 90% of your burn waiting for this backfire to go 10% of the distance. And then you light that head fire and you spend 10% of your time watching that thing whooshing over 90% of the distance, okay? The nature of those fires is different though. We might, depending on the circumstances and our goals, we might want to backfire the whole thing because a backfire is going to be more slow and more thorough. It's usually going to get into the duff better, usually, okay? And that's good. A head fire, it's going to go so fast, especially if there's a good bit of wind, that it might skip over a lot of stuff. So if there's like some woody encroachment, a head fire might pass over it so fast that it doesn't have enough time to hold that heat on it to kill it. Or it might pass over and leave a lot of duff behind. So there's pros and cons to both. It just depends on what your goals are, right? a stripping fire. Anybody want to take a guess what that is?
Strips of fire.
Well, okay, all right. What might be the purpose of that?
So you don't have one big fire going on all at the same time, you have sections of little smaller ones.
Yeah, and a lot of the time what it's about is about saving time. Imagine my field is 1,000 acres and I've got almost no wind, okay? I've lit my backfire, I've got a good fire line, I light my head fire and there's not much wind carrying it forward, so it's moving pretty slowly too. It's like, I got 1,000 acres to burn, I don't want to be here for a week. So I put strips every 50 yards or 100 yards or 500 yards or whatever, so that you got a bunch of head fires going at once. So it just makes it go a lot faster. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes, and it's kind of almost close to what we do a lot, you've got a little fire that's very well contained, you got a good fire line all the way around it, you've got great burning conditions, great fuel, there's very little chance that this fire is going to get out. You can just lay your fire line along your backfire, have a couple people with drip torches go up the flanks, and then go ahead and do your head fire all at once, whoosh, and the whole thing just comes in and takes care of itself pretty quickly. That's called a ring fire. The primary disadvantage of a ring fire that I don't love is that wildlife get trapped in the middle, and that can be small mammals and rabbits, birds can fly out, herpetofauna. But you would be amazed the number of times that we have scared deer out of a field the size of Brimhall over on the farm, that, we got people all around it with drip torches, burning, yelling, talking, and halfway through the burn, 6 deer come running out of the middle of the grass. Yeah, it's happened many times. A couple times across University Avenue and right across the quad in the middle of the day, in the middle of the afternoon. So, wildlife are in those areas, and if you do a ring fire, you really increase the chance that you're gonna have wildlife mortality. So, okay, so here's a fire lane, and this is where we've created a backfire that's slowly burning back against the wind, creating a black line that turns this 6-foot fire lane here into a 12-foot fire lane, right? That makes it much more ready for a head fire to come along. Okay, here's a head fire, much bigger. And guys, you'd be amazed. I have seen native warm season grass fields burning with a head fire, with flames 60, I kid you not, 60 feet in the air, and flames in the treetops. They could really go. This is an example of a stripping fire, where you got your head fire going along. It's like, okay, I'm going to speed things up, so you create another head fire there. So you got a few all going at the same time. This is a few pictures of creation of a fire lane. You can create a fire lane a lot of the ways. A simple way to do it, if you have flat enough land in a tractor, is just using something like a fire plow or a single bottom plow. You just go along and that plow just turns dirt over, and you get about 2 or 3 feet wide of dirt. You can fly. I've seen people on tractors, moving 15 miles an hour laying down fire lane. You can use a disc, and that creates a little bit wider fire lane. Depending on your tractor and your disc and the soil conditions and the vegetation growing there, you often don't get something that looks quite that clean. You often get something that has more vegetative debris in there. So the disc may or may not work really, really well. You don't have to use equipment. You can go ahead of time and plant something that's, okay, if this is February, what can you tell me about that right there?
Probably warm season.
It's not a warm season. If it's February, that's a cool season, something, right? This is a cool season grass, maybe fescue. Fescue works. Clover is a common green fire line. Imagine a native warm season grass field, and you go all the way around it with a clover border. That clover border can serve as a small game food plot and as a green fire line, right? Now, Is there anything brown and dead mixed in there? Yeah, there is. Can fire creep through there? Yeah, it can. As a matter of fact, you can see where it was slowly creeping through. And what's this guy doing? He's going along looking for where fire is creeping, about halfway across, and just putting it out with a sprayer or putting it out with a flat, right? So a green fire line is nice because you don't have to use equipment to create the line right there. It's there all the time, and it can serve multiple purposes, but you just have to be careful of it. Good? Cool. In undergraduate school, I was, back in the day, they didn't have as many regulations, so they let college students sign up for and fight wildfires. So in Kentucky, I fought fires on the Daniel Boone National Forest for the U.S. Forest Service. And a lot of what we did was worked on trail crews. And I worked on a trail crew for a couple of years, and by my senior year, I was the head of a trail crew. And what trail crews typically did was build fire lines through the woods. This is places that was mountainous, and there were a lot of trees, so you couldn't take a tractor through there. So we did it by hand. And what that typically involves is a line. It might be, it's often around 6 or 8 people. It could be more, it could be less. 6 or 8 is pretty good. And most of them have fire rakes. Okay, there might be one with a Pulaski, and one with something else. What the first person does goes along, and they just take one quick rake, just one little go. And in the woods, often what they're moving leaves. They're just on the forest floor, just leaf litter, right? And they don't make much of an impact. The second person is doing the same thing right behind them. They're just going along like this. And the third person is right behind them doing that. By the time you get to the 6th person, they've got something that looks a lot closer to this, right? And then the next person might be there with a Pulaski, who's cutting any roots or stumps or logs that those earlier guys didn't get. Then one more person with a rake coming behind them to clean all that out, right? So that crew can move along. In this case, for a wildfire, the fire's here, so the people in charge of fighting the fire say on the map, this is where we need a fire line, this is how fast the fire is moving. So they'll get that line in place so that when the fire gets to it, it'll go out. But we can do the same thing for a prescribed fire, doing it on purpose if we're going to burn the woods. That's fire through the woods. Usually around here in this part of the world, it's just meandering along, burning leaf litter, burning debris on the forest floor. That type of fire is called a surface fire. Okay. When most people think of forest fires, is this what they think of? No, what do they think of?
Smoky Mountains catching on fire.
Well, that one was bad, yeah. A lot of the time they think of like the big fires that you see out west where the whole trees are burning and blowing up, right?
Or in Hawaii.
Or Hawaii, yeah. We call those crown fires, right? And most of our trees around here are hardwoods, and they're not highly flammable, so you don't get much in the way of crown fires. What species is the whole tree burning? A lot of the time that's conifers, and we see that more in the west, in the western United States. Do we have any conifers in the southeast? Yeah, the Gulf Coastal Plain is the southern coniferous forest. Are we having crown fires when we burn those pines? Mostly not. What's happening is just burning the pine needles on the forest floor. And a lot of our southern pine forests historically were pretty open, so there weren't that many trees. And what you've got is pine needles down here and a bunch of tree trunks that are not highly flammable. The tops of the trees, just a big old bundle of turpentine that are highly flammable, but the fire can't get to it. But when we suppress fires for a long time, we get more and more fuel, dead wood, dead limbs. And when you have a bunch of dead stuff coming out from the tree trunks and leaning over and that sort of thing, that fire can catch that stuff on fire and work its way up into the crown. We call those fuels that are in the mid-story, who knows what they're called? Ladder fuels, because it's a ladder for the fire to get up into the crown, right? Not a big, we don't really have that right here because we don't have that strong pine component. But where you do have it, sometimes fire managers, they don't like to see those ladder fuels. From a wildlife perspective, ladder fuels, ladder stuff is good habitat, but it does create a potential for a surface fire to become a crown fire. There's one more type of fire. You got surface crown. Does anybody know the other type? Not quite as common. It's a specialized situation.
Ground surface.
Nope. A ground fire. A ground fire. This is a situation where you have very high organic matter in the soil. Think like, for example, you've heard of like peat bogs in the British Isles, right? If those peat bogs ever dry out, if they go through a drought period, you just got feet of peat moss, of organic matter. And if a fire gets into that, it's not an open flame, it's just coals moving through, right? And if a fire ever gets into that, it can just go and go and go. And there's situations where you've got a surface fire and you don't realize that it's become a ground fire somewhere, and you put out the flames and you think it's all good and gone, and you go home and a week later a fire pops up a quarter mile away because it's been moving through the ground in this area. That's kind of a specialized situation. It doesn't happen all the time everywhere, but there's some times and places where that can happen. And fire managers should know, if you're in one of those places that has very high organic matter, like peat areas, then, and it's a droughty time, be aware,
That's kind of
ground
cool.
fires. What's that?
So that's kind of cool.
It kind of is. Yeah, gotta be aware of. Yeah. It can be really destructive because you're destroying a whole lot of organic matter, and that's building a lot of life. Here's a situation where we have to watch out in the forest. In a field, the only way that a fire can jump a fire lane is if fire or embers or burning grass moves across, right? But in a forest, you might think everything's fine and dandy. Let me back up. You've got this fire coming along. I put a fire lane right here in front of it. You think, well, it's going to get to the fire lane and everything's fine. But what if you don't see that there's a tree that's hollow, rotten, it's burning on the inside? There's going to come a point, you got your fire lane right here, there's going to come a point, maybe at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning, when that thing comes down and it drops fire on the back side of your fire lane, and there it goes again, right? So when you're building your fire lane through your forest, you got to look for like dead snags or hollow trees and either cut them down or go in front of them or move way back so that when that thing does fall, it'll still be inside of the fire zone. So there's a bit more challenge in the forest watching out for that sort of situation. Okay, so some authorities. How many of you did the red card certification? Did any of you do the red card certification last spring? Okay, so y'all heard about it though. Okay. So the National Wildfire Coordinating Group is the group that's over fighting wildfires in the United States. This is part of the United States Fire Administration, and they oversee an educational facility called the National Fire Academy. I don't know that it's necessarily a place as it is just an institution, okay? And their system for certifying people to do different jobs within firefighting, be on a trail crew, be a smoke jumper, be a trail crew leader, whatever, is called the Incident Qualification and Certification System. And to be able to start out as a firefighter for the federal government, being paid by the Forest Service to go fight fires on public lands, you need 2 courses. National Wild Coordinating Group course number S130, which is basic firefighter training, and S190, which is introduction to wildland fire behavior. If you take both of those courses, you receive a card called an incident qualification card. That card used to be red, so it's called the red card. And so when people say they've got the red card, they took the red card course, they took these 2 courses that mean that they can be a basic firefighter, wildland firefighter. Now, this is different than prescribed fires, okay? This is to fight wildfires, not prescribed fires, for the federal government on federal public land, okay? Prescribed fire is different, and many states have started, a lot of the time, historically, there hasn't been training, But in recent decades, many states have started creating some sort of a training system. Tennessee started theirs, I don't know, 15 years ago, 15 years ago probably, 15 years ago. So this is within the Tennessee Division of Forestry. They work with the Tennessee Prescribed Fire Council. There is a Tennessee Fire Service and Codes Enforcement Academy in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, where all firefighters go to get trained. This is mostly city firefighters, okay? But that's where you go, and now I think you can take the course online since COVID, to take, of the many courses, one of them is the Tennessee Certified Prescribed Burn Manager course, okay? Now, like I said, now I think you can take it, maybe you can take it online. You have to go there for the field part at the end.
Dr. Palmer?
Yeah.
That's 255.
Where did I say 255?
Oh, it's like a time, yeah, that's wrong. That's what I was just looking at.
This is not a 2 hour, this is a 1 hour class.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Let me quick, okay, I'll finish later. Okay. Sorry about that. I was just gonna keep on going. I would have been done